Hello everyone! Welcome back to the channel. I'm Ben, this is Books with Benghis Khan, and today I have for you the Unpopular Opinions Tag. So I recently saw this done at the Literature Science Alliance channel by Angela, and it got me thinking a lot about my own answers for them, and I had a lot to say about these prompts, so I wanted to take my own try at it. So here we go. The first one is a genre great that you don't get the hype for. And I'll say yet, because I've only read one book in the Discworld series, and by Terry Pratchett, and that is Mort, one of his earliest books, and one that is often I've never really seen it as people's favorite in the series. But I did not get too involved with the characters here, besides Death, who did not have a lot of page time. But the main character did not get really engaged by. The plot didn't really hook me in. People talk about all the great, really deep social commentary, the hilarious humor throughout these, and I just did not see too much of that going on in Mort. But I have not yet tried any of the City Watch books, some of the really highly touted standalones, so it is such a beloved series, and a lot of people that I follow love it, so I may not get the hype for it yet, but hopefully I will soon as I try more books. For prompt 2, an adaptation you wish was never made, I have one that is probably not too unpopular, but it is the only answer I have for this, which is the Hobbit movie trilogy directed by Peter Jackson. So I absolutely adore Peter Jackson's 3 Lord of the Rings films, and my wife got really into them, watching them with me as well. But these 3 films, in retrospect, are an abomination. They don't work as singular films like the Lord of the Rings movies do. They don't work as a whole. They took this slim 300-page breezy adventure book and bloated it out into 3 unnecessary movies. I mean, there are some scenes in there that I enjoyed. The trolls, the stuff with Gollum, being in the dragon's lair. If we would have put all this into the one-volume story that Tolkien gave us, it might have been great. But instead, we got all sorts of unnecessary plot lines. Also, how is the CGI worse in these later movies? And it just took me out of my immersion a lot of the time. The bad graphics, the romance plots were horrendous, the battles were bloated and fairly uninteresting. I can't believe what they did. The Hollywood studios, how they butchered this great beloved little book. And yeah, so unnecessary to have made those at all. Just squeezing every little penny they can out of Tolkien and his wonderful stories. Alright, for prompt 3, that is a book or series for which you have to fight back your inner snob because you kind of think people just don't get it. And for me, that would be The Magicians by Lev Grossman. So I was captivated by this first book and then the 2 sequels, so the whole trilogy. And then it was one of the earliest fantasy books I read when I got back into adult fantasy in 2018, and I wasn't yet immersed in the online fantasy fandom on our fantasy and BookTube and Discord. But when I did get more immersed in there, I found that a lot of people hate these books, and maybe hate the first book especially, and then DNF the series and don't go through the whole thing. And I keep on seeing the same complaints. The main character, Quentin, is whiny and intolerable and really annoying and couldn't connect to the characters. But honestly, I do think this is missing the point of the series. This is not heroic fantasy. This is not the type of series and book where you can go in and just find characters who have very few flaws and that you can get so easily behind and maybe relate to in a more kind of escapist way, like seeing our more transcendent, better selves reflected back through a heroic character. That's not what Grossman is doing here. This feels more to me like literary fiction in the way the characters are so complex and nuanced and true to life and very flawed, even if they're the ones who are the ones that we're supposed to root for in the protagonists. And yes, it is maybe not so easy to love all of the aspects of these characters, but I found them to be compelling. And the whole premise of the series is so interesting, where this main character, Quentin, who probably does have clinical depression. He is a fan of Portal fantasy growing up. He's a very disaffected teenager in New York City, and he discovers that magic is real. There is a magic school that he can attend, and the series is an investigation of the effect of that on our lives and our psyche, and does it solve all of your life's issues and mental health issues? And Grossman's answer was no, that life is just as messy on the other side of the portal. And it's just so many unpredictable, interesting things happen in this book and in the series. And it's just a very worthwhile read that ended up being one where I did get invested in these characters' journeys, even if it was uncomfortable at times and not the easiest to root for. Prompt 4, a book or series that you're tired of everyone hating on. And for me, that would be one of my beloved babies, the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. That's a 9-book kind of alternate historical fiction fantasy series where it's set during the Napoleonic Wars, but dragons who are sentient and very verbal exist and are all over the world, integrated into societies in different ways and playing a role in a lot of military aspects as well. And this is a beautiful new omnibus of the first 3 books that I just got from Grim Oak Press, and the cover gives you a great sense of the overall vibe of the series. It is on the cozy fantasy side. There's definitely some gritty action and really tense battle scenes, but at the heart of the series is the bond and friendship between the main character Lawrence and the dragon Temeraire. And here you can see Lawrence is reading to Temeraire. They have such a pure, just loving bond of friendship. And throughout the series, there's lots of other characters that become friends with Lawrence or just friends with each other. And so that's this main type of relationship that's explored throughout the series. There's a lot of fun travel to different continents, and you get to see different cultures and how they interact with dragons. This is not grimdark. This is not very extremely complex, epic fantasy with a lot of different moving parts and characters. This is a fairly focused story that just breezed by for me. And I see a lot of people just calling this okay, calling it mid. Maybe they read the first book and they said, oh, it's okay, but didn't really hook me in and get me invested to want to keep going. And it's just daggers to my heart because I love it so much. I don't need everyone to love all the books that I love, but it's nice when other people do and you can connect with them over that shared love. And I know this was a very popular series that was being released, but it's been a few years now since it's been over, and I don't see too much hype around it. I don't see too many people talking about it or gushing over it. And so it kind of feels like I'm alone in my love for this series. So if you do love it, let me know in the comments so we could connect about that. But yeah, I just wish, people leave my little baby alone at this point. Let me love it and enjoy it for what it is and all of the positives around it. All right, prompt 5, a book or series that everyone thinks is really powerful, but that I didn't connect with. And I'm going to go with my least favorite book from a series that I do love, which is Toll the Hounds by Stephen Erickson. This is book 8 of Malazan Book of the Fallen. A lot of people who are huge Malazan fans have this as either their favorite book or one of their favorites, but it was by far the least engaging book in this series. And when I read it, I didn't know some of the context around it and why it might have felt so different from the rest of the series, but Erickson had lost his father before writing this and wrote it, I think, with the intention of really processing his grief over that. And maybe that's why there's that grief and death are so heavily just integrated into this book throughout as major themes. But this is a slow Malazan book. There's not much of the military plot lines that I love so much from the series. There's Tist and Dee, central characters who I just could not connect with at all. Clip and his group, I think just we spend a lot of time with, and they're my least favorite characters to spend time with in the series easily. The stuff with Kellic, the Death Goo, and the Dying God, I just did not connect with all that thematic stuff that Erickson was doing with those. I mean, there's already a god of death. Did we really need the Dying God? I didn't think it was developed very well. Didn't have much payoff. And then everyone talks about, but even if a lot of the book is slow, there's this epic ending and it's amazing, one of the best endings of all time. Maybe the book had just lost me by that point, but I did not have the greatest time with that ending either. And some of the stakes involved with the whole thing with chaos and the wagon and the tattoo, maybe I just didn't understand the stakes that were set up, and that, I think, sapped some of my investment with everything that happened in the ending and the hounds as well. Just a lot of things just over my head with this one. But even if though I didn't connect with it on my first read, I am hoping that if I reread the series later on, come back to it, maybe a little older and wiser, maybe after I've lost more people in my life, and so the themes around grief might connect with me more. But I am hopeful to connect with this differently and more so in the future. But so far, yeah, not one that I've connected with like so many other readers, unfortunately. For prompt 6, a character you don't get the hype for, I'm staying in Malazan for this one, and that would be Animander Rake. And I like this character. This character is extremely interesting and badass for sure. Amazing art here on the sub-press edition. And they just don't get a lot of page time in the series. I don't think they have a point of view section, or if they do, it's really short. Maybe this character is more beloved of those who've read from Carcanis, but I've not done any of the prequel books. So just from the 10 Malazan Book of the Fallen books, Rake is not very prominent, and there are probably 20 other characters that I feel more invested in and that I would have ranked as higher character on my favorites list than Rake. But Rake, on a recent poll done by Matt's Fantasy Book Reviews, Rake was pretty high in the top 20, the only Malazan character that made that top 30 characters list from all fantasy. And I just don't get it. I mean, is it the art around it? I think actually a lot of it is the name. The name is so cool, so awesome, that I think people just are drawn to this character, as well as the sword. They're crucial to the narrative on the whole, but yeah, that is one I definitely don't fully get the hype for. Prompt 7, a book or series everyone wants an adaptation for, but I don't, and that's an easy one for me. I do not need a First Law live adaptation in the least. These books are so special to me for their, I think, very unique tone and atmosphere that's a combination of dark and gritty with just so much wit and cleverness and humor, and a lot of that comes through in the internal monologues for the POV characters. And I think that would be very hard to portray in a similar way on the screen, where we don't have those inner monologues. I just have a hard time envisioning a First Law live adaptation that feels like the experience of the books. It would just either veer more towards the dark and grim side and be just another Game of Thrones style show, or maybe they'd lean really heavily into the humor, but I don't know. I don't think they'd do that. So I think that aspect of it that's so precious to me would be lost. And these books are so great. I'm a visualizer. I don't typically need adaptations at all. And so I can experience the full immersion with the books and with Stephen Pacey's narration. Yeah, please don't do anything to soil the First Law series for me, Hollywood. All right, prompt 8 is a weird one that I don't really like. So it is a book or series you think people have bias toward and don't really love or hate it as much as they claim. So I don't really buy this prompt. I don't think people usually misrepresent how they feel about books, both to themselves or to others. So I'm going to change this one to where the hype around a series, both positive or negative, has particularly strong effects. And for me, I think that would be The Wheel of Time. So I read this one just a couple years ago, and I had been spending a few years immersed in the larger fantasy fandom, a lot through our fantasy forums on Reddit, through BookTube, and I'm thinking about how that might have affected my read or others' reads. And it being so popular and so prominent, I feel like outside influences can't help but have an effect on people's experience. So on the negative side, I had seen so much before I ever picked up Eye of the World about the just boring, overextended descriptions that Jordan's constantly doing of describing buildings and wall hangings and clothes and jewelry. And it was just going to be pages and pages of this, and it was going to be most of the books. And I was going in almost expecting that, and so delightfully surprised that I didn't get that. But I just saw so much overblown criticism about the number of times you'll see braid tugs or arms crossing. And this, I think, maybe turned me off from ever starting the series, but I think it can't help but have an effect when people try it and they see some of these things happening. And it might not happen as much as the exaggerations say, but I think there's a confirmation bias at play. People are on the lookout for it, and then when they see it, they just confirms what everyone had been saying. But gladly, I don't think that really had that big of a negative effect on me, because I ended up really loving the series overall. And so part of me thinks, was I affected in that direction? I had heard for so long that there's so much epic, grand scale world building, and Jordan's a master with the world building. And I'm thinking, in retrospect, like, is that really true? Like, was the world building that great? Maybe I was drawn in with the world building and biased to liking it more, or even the characters, some of the greatest characters in fantasy that people love so much. And so maybe I was more positively biased to really get invested in a lot of the characters and their arcs. But on the negative side too, I think you can't talk about Wheel of Time without hearing about the slog and the 3-book slog, books 8 through 10. And I think this definitely biases people toward just assuming that books 8 and 9 and 10, all of them are going to be this giant slog that you'll have to get there. And maybe some people do experience it that way, but because it's such a prominent series, I think a lot of people both pick up Wheel of Time and then continue it, who maybe the series is just not for, or who should have DNF'd long before they ever get to book 8, just because it's one of those most widely read series in the fandom, so people want to get through it and have it under their belt and be able to talk about it and form their own opinions. And I ended up loving book 8. Book 8 and 9 to me, they're some of the smaller, most fast-paced books in the series for me, and some really compelling events are happening in those. I did not experience any slogginess with books 8 and 9. Maybe some in book 10, but I do think the idea that there's this massive 3-book slog really puts people off, and then I think causes some confirmation bias when they get there as well. Yeah, I think what everyone says about the series, the hype, both positive and negative, can't help but have an effect on people's reads. This tag's been around for a while, so I'm not sure who's maybe done it already, but I want to tag 3 channels that I think I would be really interested in their answers and who might want to do it. So I'm going to tag Jake Bishop, I'm going to tag Kyle at Read by Kyle, and the young channel StoryTube, since Carlos and Yolanda are just killing it over there. I can't wait to see their combined answers for these prompts. I think will be very interesting with how well read they are. So yeah, I'm curious to see what they'll have to say, but if I didn't tag you and want to try it out, just go for it. Let me know in the comments which one of these unpopular opinions you vociferously disagree with, or maybe multiple of them, and we'll have some maybe fun disagreements or ways that we can connect over our unpopular opinions as well. So yeah, I'll catch you later.